Okay, so now we'll try to make 15 minutes shorter than yesterday, meaning that we have now 1 hour and 15 minutes of round table, level 2. Just to
speed up the speakers, or
sorry?
you're gonna speed up the speakers by 10%, or
no way.
Yesterday we talked a little bit about school and tradition. It was a bit confusing because it looks like even for us it's unclear. We have few ideas. We've thrown on the table a few ideas yesterday. I hope it had made some sense. Maybe it will make more sense tonight as we go further into the 16th century. Let's put it like that, fighting material. I would like to, so yesterday it was mainly Fabrice and Keith that were asked direct questions. Tonight it will be Rob and Roman, but please, Fab and Keith, intervene as much as you like and enlighten us.
What do you wish for? You want to be helpful?
Please, please. Regarding what we've talked yesterday, would you agree to speak about a tradition for Bolognese source material and for late German source material? Please, short answers, yes, no, and why. We shall begin with you.
Yes, because there is a definite school that was established, and people trace their roots from that school and mention it in their treatises.
So it's named School of into the treatise.
It doesn't have necessarily a name, but it is certainly a school that passes its traditions down.
Thanks.
Yes, there is a 16th century German martial tradition. It's not monolithical. It's very, it is. It differs from place to place, but we can say it's a tradition. It keeps evolving during the 16th century in connection to mostly social needs, and it does stem from the roots of the 15th century martial traditions. And yes, we can also talk about schools as well. I mean, as far as we know.
Thank you. Now, I shall ask you, as yesterday, a 3-level question, meaning that I would like to introduce us to the source materials, the presentation of your source material. Then, could you define late German tradition system from a technical point of view and Bolognese tradition system? Since there is no, yes, maybe for the Bolognese you will introduce us to Dardy after, but there is, could you also present the man or authorities that would somehow sum up these traditions? So who would like to begin? Let's begin with the source material. Presenting the source material, and he has begun before, so that's your turn.
Okay, the source material. Yeah, there's a lot of it. Actually, it's what we have. There's quite a lot of it, and mostly if you go and see through it, you will see that it has a lot of connection to the medieval fighting. You will see the same elements. You will see the fighting in armor, fighting in Blossfechten, fighting all the elements that go on, but they're still 16th century. And you will also see different intentions. Okay, if you remember from yesterday, we said how we have different social levels, social classes, things. And now we have to remember that in 16th century we have some sort of a revolution. Protestantism, that the violence itself really got deep into the social tissue. Now, I don't want to delve too deep in this, but you can imagine that you have communities which were suddenly very confused by very powerful elements, and we see the need of a controlled violence, okay, codified violence. We see especially in urban centers, becomes very, very strict. Okay, the penalties for disobeying become very, very harsh. And we can also see that the fighting itself corresponds to that. Now, I'm not talking necessarily about battlefield fighting. Battlefield fighting is just, get the job done. But I'm talking mostly now about the urban fighting now. To kill someone, to maim someone, just to make someone harmless. It becomes very, very important. It was important before as well. I don't want to say that the 15th century was just like one big cave. But in the 16th century, you can see codified behavior with corresponding tactics. Now, the sources, you see the compendium, a lot of compendia, that some of them have been researched up to a bit, and some of them have not been touched yet, basically. You can imagine a book, let's call it a book, and it has several layers, several sources, and then you begin studying them, and you see that they're confused, and then somebody tells you, yeah, they're not from the same person, they're not from the same era, they may not be from the same geographical things, and they have been shuffled like a deck of cards in the 18th or 19th century. Ha ha. So not all of the sources are like that, but you still get that. On the other hand, the 16th century, you have the beautiful invention of press. Yeah? You can also imagine what that does to spreading the knowledge alongside traveling, which is, I believe, topic for another roundtable.
True.
The authorities, what can I say? Me, for example, I deal mostly with Joachim Meyer, if I talk about the German martial tradition. And again, Joachim Meyer, he did lean somewhat on previous Kunstperspectives, even Lichtenauer line. On the other hand, he was a revolutionary on his own. He was a bit of Che Guevara. Okay. Not fighting the imperialism though, he was the imperial man himself. Anyway, I hope that makes sense.
So that's a late authority then.
Very.
When do you change? When it is the beginning of the changes that would define a 16th century or late German tradition? When?
This is interesting. I mean, can you put a demarcation line? Isn't it really difficult?
I know. That's why I ask.
Yeah, it's processes. Yeah? Yes, you do have events that will, change the picture, that will sort of shuffle the lines, that will make things different, and the tomorrow will not be the same as yesterday. But basically, first of all, is we still have problems dating the sources in a certain way. We still have problems putting the sources to their proper location, to their proper geographical context, social context as well. So I don't think I can answer that question when it begins. Maybe I can play it safe and say, oh yeah, but 1500, from that point on, we can talk about the 16th century transition. But look at Spain, look at France, look at England, look at imperial lands, look at Italy. I would call it I would say that sort of things started sedimenting at the end of the first half of the 16th century. Then the picture became a bit more clear, a bit.
And what about Lichtenauer? Is he still authority in the 70s?
Well, he's been quoted. Even Joachim Meyer quotes Lichtenauer, etc. The lines, the principles. Now, technically, we can see the yays and the nays. He's not following blindly. But then again, it was said yesterday, was Lichtenauer just an authority, so you can sort of, put more value to your work, or was it for real? I can't answer to that question.
Okay.
Okay, can I make a comment here?
Please.
In medieval law, it was always the older law that was the better law. So if you could quote an old source, you immediately had the upper hand. That was always better than the new source. Now, the invention that caused a problem with this principle was the invention of writing and then printing, because as soon as you had writing, the old source was no longer the remembrance of the priests and the old people who remembered the old source the way it was supposed to be remembered, but you could actually look at the old source, so that made that message. But it is still, and you can see it in the American Declaration of Independence, that the old source is the better source of law.
So, as we mentioned yesterday, in some glossators, quoting Aristotelian philosophy gave them some power.
Yeah.
And in French, we still have this kind of stuff when you talk about argument d'autorité.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's because a famous man has said that it's like that.
Yeah, some modern laws in English in England are still based on this. Yeah. True.
Lichtenau, yes, for example, Joachim Meyer, he uses the same words with the same principles that you actually got to learn today at Keith's workshop for nach Indus. But then Joachim just adds gleichzeitig to that. Is that Lichtenau tradition or is it not? That's
Developed.
Okay. Just to notice, so as far as I know, Lichtenau is still quoted into the Suter fencing book, fights book. So that's later, 1612. So that means that first time he's quoted according to our knowledge of the source would be this complicated dating about 1389 up until 1612.
You might include Theodore Verolini in roughly 1670 as then part of the Lichtenau tradition, depending how you want to finish the tradition.
Thanks. Now we shall move to Rob.
Okay, things are a little more simple for the Wagner sources. Okay. All right, we'll do it. Okay. We have a very interesting start. We have Chakravarti, and he's actually a professor of mathematics and astronomy at the university, which is established in 1088. It's, I think, the oldest or one of the oldest universities in Europe. Yeah? So, I will defer to your greater knowledge. But as we'll see later with some of the Arabian instructors, he's got a great knowledge of mathematics, and this is very, very important. And he's dealing with what, for most of you, will be a new weapon style. He's establishing a school, and he's teaching things somewhat differently. But we don't know an awful lot. We know he's got a treatise, which is actually looking at fencing and geometry. And for those of you who I think are doing German longsword, that's really quite important. We've seen quite a lot. He had a student, or his student had a student called De Luca. And this guy taught two people, Mancellino and Marozzo. And they stand, really, Marozzo stands like a giant of the 16th century for single-handed sword, the sword of buckler, and other things. This is where the power of print comes into play, because Mancellino and Marozzo, and to a lesser extent Mancellino, are reprinted and reprinted and reprinted throughout the centuries. So this thing is passed on. What's interesting about their tradition, what they're doing, is they talk in a slightly esoteric manner, particularly Marozzo, who is, let's just say, confusing, which is why there's no English translation at the moment, despite various better people than me having a damn good go at it. they're interested in the courtly fight. This is, they're producing a tradition, they're educated people from a line of educated people who are presenting a style of fencing which is very much in the style of what we call the post-Renaissance. It is at the time where the art form of Bologna is the highest, it's comparable with Florence and Rome. And can I just make a plea here? When you look at your treatises, don't look at it as some sort of self-encapsulated thing. Look at it in the context. So you have a highly educated system, you have a system that's being presented to the nobility who are educated, who are artistic, who are very cultured. So we have these two guys here, and they're talking about how you should do a duel, how you should present yourself. They're talking about, has anyone heard of Castiglione? Okay, Castiglione did a text, it's almost a companion to, we heard of Medici. You must have heard of Medici. Is there anyone out there? Come on. And it talks about the courtier. A lot of this is how you should present yourself, how you should be. Using the sword at this time, even late in the 1530s, is very much about how you are perceived, how you present yourself. It is for the nobility. Maybe the upper classes, if they can buy their way into the nobility. None of these artisan guys, thank you very much. Then, in the 1550s, something happens. And I'm not sure what. I'm sure there are probably better people who do know. But suddenly we start going away from a courtly fight to a deadly fight. Manciolino does talk about a very definite dueling fight, someone to kill it, but beforehand we're talking about humiliating someone and showing yourself better than the other person, not necessarily killing them. And there's a guy called Vigiani, and he wrote something in the 1550s which was simplifying the very elegant, overwrought treatises of Marozzo and Manciolino. For some reason, he says, I do not want to be published for 20 years. He tells his brother this. And I hope this isn't lost on you, because this is actually a pivotal point. 1553, a guy called Agrippa publishes a journal on fencing, and he's a mathematician, he's a very famous mathematician, and he supposedly comes up with a lunge, and a lot of older humorists or historians ascribe modern fencing, the rapier, the small sword, and so on, to this guy. 3 years before, Vigiani comes up with the same idea. Now, Vigiani is not from Bologna, he's from Venice. But he's doing this system, this Bolognese city system. If you know anything about Italy, it's about the cities. He publishes this and then says, no, I don't want to publish for 20 years. He writes it and then says, I don't want to publish for 20 years. It's a fascinating treatise. It deals with certain hand mechanics, which we'll come on to, which can change the face of single-handed fighting. But nothing happens. Then you've got a guy called Dalgocchi, who's a wonderful treatise. If anyone wants to get into single-handed swords, then read Dalgocchi. He writes his treatise in 1574, I believe, about the same time that this guy Vigiani actually has his translated. And the language has changed. This is not about the courtly dance. This is not about defeating someone in duel of honour. He uses things like, you use the point of the sword because this is the best way to reach the internal organs of your enemy. He wants to kill you. He doesn't want to scar you, to humiliate you. He wants you dead. So something has happened in the 1550s, 1570s that changes the nature of fencing. And this is reflected later by the Venetian sources as well as the later Bologna sources, and indeed the Roman sources. So Dalgocchi is also someone who doesn't use a buckler, which Marozzo and Manciolino does. He uses sword and dagger, a single sword, or he uses sword and cloak. We are seeing the beginnings of what will later be the rapier. What's interesting for me, and what's bringing a lot of questions in, and I hope I'm not inundating with things, is when you fight with that style, there's a lot that you can compare with a guy called Carranza in Spain. And if you compare the Bolognese system with the Spanish system, you start to see some similarities. I've yet to develop it, but there's some similar things going on here, and we need to look at the context. But Dall'Agocchio is kind of like the last great side system, a system that's relying initially with the blade, and then from Vigiani and from Dall'Agocchio onwards with the point. Then something interesting happens, which HEMA has yet to really come to grips with, is a guy called Cavo. He taught Louis XIII how to use a rapier, a different weapon. Now, Bolognese system uses uses a side sword. What I recognise as in my tradition is a side sword. It is not a rapier. A rapier is a long weapon using the point. Okay, side sword mechanically is using the point. It's a huge gloss over, obviously. Cavo publishes in German. He goes to work in England, and then he goes to France. And there'll be a rather wonderful translation of Cavo later this year. You might not know that. But he is using rapier. He is breaking from the side sword tradition, though he is a Bolognese side sword person. And this is something that HEMA, I think, or us as pseudo-academics got to look at. You guys are mainly longswordists. Something happens that turns many people towards side sword, whether it's the rise of the middle class, less knightly people with, armor, whatever. And then something happens in the late 16th century that turns people towards, whether it be fashion, effectiveness, whatever, using a longer weapon for the lunge. Or you have certain people who are starting to use things like a schiavona, like a backsword or something like that. Something's going on there, and I think that's something we really need to look at. But the linchpin for me is this Bolognese system. A final word I would say is that we are obsessed with pigeonholing, as we mentioned last night. We have De Grassi, which is translated in English, and I think he was a Venetian, I'm not sure. You have Saviolo, who goes to London, who's teaching with military long swords that are as long as a rapier. We are not looking at our transition points between our systems. We are looking at the individual systems. And I think when we fenced today, we had a lot of fun just working out some things against different things. We know from some treatises, like Thibaut, 1628, he's teaching rapier against longsword. So something's happening at these points. We cannot isolate ourselves. So my last plea is that, yes, we can see a definite school, but let's not forget the transitional phases and what happens there.
If I may just add to this, two things. Yes, the rapier, the word, the idea, the weapon behind it. It is stuff for some debate.
Yeah.
It just didn't appear with Louis XIII. No. By the way, if you know your Alexandre Dumas, Louis XIII was the king of the Four Musketeers. Yeah. Okay. Something must have happened for that, and the rapier, the idea of the rapier, something maybe for another round table, not this one, but also it's the evolution of technology, metallurgical, to come up with the blades that are longer, thinner as well. It's also something to do with that.
And there's a social context as well. There's an English source that says he knew that the two of them were servants because they carried side swords, and he does say side swords, whereas the other person carried a rapier. Now, for me, that's kind of like a huge mind mess, I'd say, because that speaks volumes. But also, when we go to the end of our period, we start to see the rapier is carried on in Italy and Spain, which shrinks in France and in Britain. So, for next year, maybe.
Another one.
But yeah, this is interesting.
A small question to you. Is the Bolognese system You said it appeared, or it sees, you mentioned the name down. You said that
It's lost. Yeah.
But, and how do we know that?
That's all I have, is that it's quoted in Barroso. Barroso quotes him as this great person, and it's tantalizing, so it's a horrible thing, I think, whenever you look at the treatise and say, yes, I'm very good, but this guy's really great, he's the one to go for. Oh, but no, fine.
Any link with Fiore?
That would be down to these gentlemen to say, I think. I would say that there's no long sword in the treatises.
Really?
There's Spadone. Montante, but
What is Spadone?
Yeah. That's a very year after.
How much time do you have?
I would say, to answer your question, I would say there's no direct relationship with Fiore. It's not like Fiore kind of integrates or streamlines into these systems, but they come from a common ground. In terms of the names of the gods, for instance, or the posters. Fiore has Codalonga, there are lots of Codalongas.
Yes.
Anywhere, Codalongas, anywhere, Di più poco.
And also Ponte de Ferro, so on.
Ponte de Ferro and Bull's Tooth, and all these terms, all these nomenclatures, they come from somewhere older than Fiore. Fiore uses them in full knowledge that he did not invent these names. He even says this posta is the posta frontale di Tacorona. This is the frontal guard that other masters call the guard of the crown, which is interesting because crown exists elsewhere. But Fiore has all these Colongas and both teeth and everywhere. And so you can't really put Fiore within this Bolognese system, but definitely there were connections.
It's certainly not as clear as you've got with the Bolognese tradition, who do cite each other. And again, I'm going to draw a comparison with the Spanish Di Freda. They cite one another, either to say, I am descended from, or to say, these people are imbeciles. I know what I'm doing here.
Sorry, a question. Was there any commercial driver for an author to claim that he was the inventor of the system?
Sure.
Yeah.
All the time, absolutely. Of course. See, the newest, most, super effective system by the it still exists. For example,
The washing powder, the new formula, stuff like that.
I think this is actually an interesting point. Again, we touched on it last night about the sanctity of these sources. I actually have to draw from a Venetian source that's later in the Bolognese tradition, who's Arabian one, which is fabulous. He says these pictures are exact representations, and he also says if you do these, you'll be perfect, and this system works every time if you get it right. Name me a self-help book that says, well, maybe it'll work sometimes, and maybe it won't. Give it a go.
It works every time.
Yeah,
And 50% of the
you
time.
are right to say. Marozzo is selling a guide. Mancellino is selling a guide. It's to courtly behaviour. It has a wider context than just fencing. It becomes a primer for your education. And that is extremely... Dall'Agocchie, who is extremely accessible, and I do recommend Forget's free online treatise if you want to get into Bolognese sourcemanship, that's the one to go for. He gives a how to survive a job in 30 days. Now, that's pure marketing.
And something else as well, the publications, the books, they become the place of discussion. There is no more sanctity of ideas. Does not exist.
Absolutely.
Not in theology, not in sword fighting, not in fencing. It all becomes how you promote yourself better. If you, he was not a fencer, Amerigo Vespucci. But if you read his diaries, his letters to his patrons, it was, well, the history maybe should reevaluate his role. But what I'm trying to say, in the 16th century, the publication become a place of discussion rather than a place of just authority.
I think, yeah, we have to be careful about the expression I like is reasoned words, because we do see that a number of these individuals will say, I have heard that certain people think this. Well, they're obviously morons. What does that affect? They're not citing the source. They're not necessarily saying why. They give a very general sort of statement, but they're using the power of the press, because of course when it's in print, as well as the newspaper, you know, you start to ascribe a certain level of authority.
Printed word sticks.
If we go back to Sosa, would just say that maybe this tendency doesn't appear with us. You can find it through the
No, it's just boosted by the media becomes really relevant here.
True.
And again, there's context. If you start to see, from that time, you'll see a lot of things said, a true discourse on. And the very title gives itself an authority. So in the general printing, particularly when you've got Protestant versus Catholic canonades that are going through, you have the establishment of an authority by the title and by the text. And I think that has to carry through with these individuals. They're, you know, it would be wrong to think as any of these guys as purists who've got no idea on how to sell their product.
Yeah, but it doesn't say
You're not referring to tournament rules on Facebook, are you?
As a member of the start.
I agree with them, yeah, the discussion did not begin with the 16th century.
Yeah, sure.
It's just,
The
but
dissemination
however,
is bigger.
yeah, the target audience just got bigger.
Yeah.
We don't
And
see
it got bigger, you know, just like that.
It doesn't change much. We still have this, you know, the ultimate guide to this, doing this or doing that, you know. People nowadays, as a commercial purposes, you know, still use these, I say that, exaggerated, you know, over emphasizing words, the ultimate, the one and only meaning, and that's basically it. Yeah.
As I say, you're not going to sell a book by saying, yeah, it might work if you're lucky.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen.
The not so good guide to.
Yeah.
So, no one can tell today when the translation from 15th to 16th to 17th century techniques, we cannot say, okay, Middle Ages start with the end of the fallen Roma, and then the techniques of the transition period is this year because of this event.
No, it doesn't work like that. In the 60s, you can't say, you can't pull Douglas Adams on that. You can't say there was this girl at this, taking tea at this pub, and then suddenly she realized an idea that could save the world, and she ran out to telephone her editor, and she was ran over a car in the street. But no, you can't say that. It happened on Sunday at 5 o'clock.
Yeah, so it was for the end of the ages, it was on Friday.
Yeah, it's the question of revolution versus evolution.
But what you can do is, because with the 16th century we have a privilege of, well, maybe the privilege of having more sources from different groups, okay? And this is the good old triangulation sort of thing. Maybe we can narrow it down, you know, in time and geography.
But also, there are other levels, other layers to this, because the core techniques themselves, the martial stuff, might have changed, or might change, or might not change. What changes, what hand in hand with societies that shelter them, is the discourse and the way of presenting and of thinking of events. You have very medieval stuff, showing a very Renaissance style, in other words, or maybe the other way around.
Yeah, and
And
you
that's
also,
the
you also see with later trees, like as I said, it's a break, where you suddenly get very violent language. You suddenly get very plain language. And we talked about this yesterday, actually. You see it as a sine wave, because early rapier is very flowery. Mid rapier, extremely dangerous in your face. Some later rapier, early side sword, small sword, becomes flowery again. And it may be reflective of that particular social context. I mean, one thing I would say is that we talked about sources. Just said that Dardi has allegedly got a lost treatise. So again, we're dealing with what survives, what's popular and what reprints. What is the English gutter press of the time and goes through and is reprinted and that? What does not survive because it's just not popular? And do not equate popularity with efficacy. That doesn't mean the same thing. One thing for me that is a real sign of a change in swordsmanship is the forward rings. These forward 2 rings, or 1 ring to begin with, and the single sword, which, if you put your finger across the hilt, changes how you fight. It makes the thrust effective, makes the control of the weapon effective. But what else is going on? It's changing the system, but we've only got a typology to look at. We don't have the early 16th century, late 15th century sources to really establish why is this happening? What's going on there?
Absolutely. In terms of 16th century German longsword, we have maybe a few different options for how we want to understand that. For example, we have the continuation of earlier 15th century things. For example, the work that is usually called the Codex Ringbeck was finished at some point in the first half of the 16th century. We've got things like Joachim's Rostock manuscript, which is 1571, just never quite finished or made it to publication. We then have other people who are driving, for example, Harenfield. He published his book through a printing press in 1516. So very early 16th century German longsword is already looking forward. Yet other 16th century German longsword is still retaining what was there before. But then we have people like Paulus Mayer, 1540s, thereabouts, who is doing historical fencing, reading 15th century and earlier texts, and recreating it, or at least trying to preserve it. So part of 16th century German fencing is the trying to preserve, trying to maybe even recreate 15th century stuff. So in terms of 16th century German martial arts, there's all kinds of different directions where it's trying to go. Some of it's trying to move forward, some of it's trying to keep hold of the past, and some of it is historical fencing, like what we're doing today. Just to muddy the waters a little.
It's linked with what we talked yesterday about authorial intents. What is the purpose of these books? And it is easier to say from the 16th century than from the earlier sources. But still, not a round table, but which is a very special specimen at present. Would we move into the technical point of view? Could you define late German tradition system as a technical point of view? What is the main change technically? Because what is the image of a 16th century technique versus a 17th century?
Well, yeah, you can basically even take a look at it. And again, it's Keith that actually brought it up at this event, you know, about the stance, about the movements. One gets a notion of people 15th centuries standing, being, fighting, maybe, going upward, and then 16th century they're sort of going forward, which means basically what you see is that the line just moves upwards and forward to the opponent. Yes. And then we can see the increase in if I talk about the longsword, you can see the increased introduction of the Federschwert, which also brings certain technical background with it. I will again mention Joachim Meyer with his dagger fighting. You have dagger simulators, or as it is written in the title of that chapter, Fighting with Dagger, and similar short weapons. You see, it's again a matter of intent. Well, why was it used like that? And then if we just take the armor fighting, it's still very much deeply rooted in medieval times. Yeah. With some of the technical, maybe metallurgical solutions, and the arms really become really nicely done. Maybe if we again mention the arm of the Henry VIII. Yeah, it's not German, but yeah, can be. Again, this is what we're dealing with. You can still use basically German longsword in the 15th century, and you can apply it to the 16th century. You just have to do some modification. If I take Cergue, Meyer's Cergue would be slightly different than the 15th century Cergue. Look at it. Some would argue that Meyer's Cergue is just Unterauge Twitch, right? The same name, perhaps different intention. Now, why different intention? Now we can talk about it all night, right? But I would like to point out the social element of that. There were things. The controlled violence was the leitmotif of the 16th century urban centers in Europe. Before, in the 15th century, which, if you just look at my own territories, you just didn't walk around the town with a sword in your hand. You just didn't. You had to have a special purpose to do that. Either you were the militia or you were one of the lords. In the 16th century, however, a nice blade became a part of your clothing. You know? But one needs to control that. So the techniques. Even the techniques, if I can refer to Joachim Meyer, he emphasizes the use of the flat. One of the interesting points. Some people call him sportsman. No stabbing, thrusting. So we see a development, development of techniques, but they're still connected to the tradition. They're not something just completely made up.
I would add to that really a lot of what drives the development in the German stuff is the social aspect and even the legal environment. If we look at the earlier 15th century sources, for example, Pascal, Talhofer, these people are sometimes writing for a duke, a nobleman. They're teaching one person how to fence. We then get into the 16th century, and there are people who are teaching lots of people how to fence. And it's very different if you have one student to whom you give private tuition who's already good to start with, and when you have a lot of people who need to learn from the basics, you need to modify either the style or how you deliver the teaching of the style. And that leads to differences between the 15th and the 16th centuries.
Just a second about that. Not only as the martial arts, the sort of the culture of controlled violence through the martial arts seep down to the social elements. We have a famous challenge in the 16th century between two semi-deities of the time, between Barack Obama and Angela Merkel. You and we have a challenge between the most Christian majesty, the King of France, and the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles, Carlos V.
Oh, you mean the Duke of Burgundy?
Sorry? and the King of France wanted to do the jousting, full suit of armor, the proper knightly way that would suit such important persons. But Charles said
He was
no.
nearly 7 feet tall.
But Charles said no, we're going to do sword and cape.
Okay.
Now, this duel never took place because the political advisors, just moved the parties away. It would be a disaster. It would be a lose-lose. You can imagine it would be a world war, something like that. But can you imagine the change of mentality in that? Okay, there was a lot of provocation, but it also means that the delivery, the education process was it wasn't only the top notch that were learning and fighting with a sword and a cape. Even the towns happened like that. Though of course the cape was not totally employed properly, but you know what I mean.
Thank you. Quick question.
Speaking en anglais. Spain, at this time was on North Italy, and we know that Italy started the Rinascimento, Renaissance, almost 1 century before France. Is maybe more or less, is maybe the way that Italians start before the Rinascimento, that the main of kings and people of North Italy and maybe Spain changed before North Europe.
Well, it appears that, contrary to the booklet belief, the Asians end on the same day all over Europe. Actually, it never ended properly. But yeah, there's a bit of truth in what you're saying, in that a lot of people had some fun in Italy in the late 15th, early 16th century. Again, it was the space to be. It was the Ibiza of the times, like pillaging villages and burning cities. For fun.
I mean, this was the connection I tried to make, because obviously you've got Spain taking it, Naples in most cases,
Yeah.
at times. But unfortunately, there's no direct correlation. We know that Bologna was taken over by the Papal States, and effectively, I think Bologna was on paper control. I do think that they're purely looking at the mechanics, the sword play, when you look at the Carranza, or the Spada Rapera, you are seeing incredible, particularly sort of that way, you are seeing something very close. The problem with Italian sources is they give you everything, but with massive gaps. And this is true right the way through to Red Crusoe. It's a pain in the ass. The Spanish give you everything, but in one massive indigestible pill. And you have to work your way through it. And something, let's come here later, I'm excited amateur, where I noticed this was the best Italian bases can look, aside from the lunge, very similar to the Spanish, particularly when they're doing solidarity. In my gut, I feel there is something going on with the Bolognese system. The problem is we call it the Bolognese system. We've already mentioned the Vigianos and Nishi. We know that De Grassi, who's doing the same sort of thing, who's later, he is not Bologna. We've got Saviola. Saviola says something interesting. He says, my treatise is taken from 6 different masters, so that I'm not a bit obsessed with people being purists. They'll nick whatever they want. He's doing some similar things as well with the songs. There are some fundamentals that are not purely organic, they're not purely mechanical, that are going on between Spanish between Spain and Italy. I can't put my finger on it yet. But that's what's tantalising for me.
Saul's Bridge, as you mentioned, in Italy. southern and the northern influence. Pietro.
That's exactly what I want. Somebody was Italian and was in Spain, somebody was Spaniard and worked in Italy. Just see, connection. And it is a very interesting transitional period. Published 1509, died in Agnello, but probably wrote his treatises in the last decade of the 15th century.
But wasn't he who said that the Germans fight in a funny way?
Yeah.
That they would take their weapons, throw them on the ground, and then start rolling on the ground like
animals.
Yeah.
Or he's also saying, for example, that he knows that there are some customs now that people fighting in shirts. As a proper man should arm himself and not take clothes off to fight. So that's something should be done on different.
Yeah, Monte's quite backwards. I mean, in a good way. You know, I love it backwards. You would cut it off.
Just let
and Monte's very interesting. Well, it's mainly about ranting, actually, his pages. But his funny thing is that according to Castiglione, Monte is the epitome of critique. Yeah, he's the best man ever in the world. Pietro Monte. After all, he taught Leonardo da Vinci how to play darts.
According to Silvio.
must have been Spanish.
An interesting note about the Renaissance. I read a fascinating textbook about the study of music at a friend's house, and I cannot remember the name of this book offhand, but it pointed out that the different arts had renaissances at different times across different countries, in terms of art, literature, music, all of these things. They all the countries had a renaissance of previous ideas at different times. But the Renaissance itself means kind of revisiting previous ideas. If we look at 16th century German fencing, there is a definite renaissance because people like Paulus Mayer are trying to recreate what was there before. Whereas maybe it might be wrong to talk about Renaissance Italian fencing because they're moving forwards rather than moving backwards. This book went on to say that although we conveniently divide stages of music into medieval, classical, Renaissance, Baroque, modern, that kind of stuff, there was actually no Renaissance in music. We have a Renaissance category in music because all the other arts had a Renaissance period. And so that people could study the arts, plural, and compare the arts, plural, music had to have a Renaissance period as well, so that students could refer to the different time periods. So perhaps for some arts there are Renaissances, and other arts sometimes there are not.
Yes, but again, it depends on how you define what Renaissance is. This Renaissance is just Italians everywhere and naked putting. That's us, with wings and shit like that. But Renaissance is the will to a claim to have reborn the what made the glory of the Roman Empire. All the authors and the philosophical and moral authorities of old, the old philosophers. This is how you define Renaissance. You know, it's the renewal of this old age of glory. And what is really interesting is that you just mentioned it. Speaking of fighting arts, well looking back, but they put it in a Renaissance frame, using this renewed, classical, revived ways, or so they thought it was, ways of doing things, but still maintaining the continuity of something older. There's a paradox now. Definitely.
So I think Renaissance historical fencing is yet another round table.
Especially with the establishment of academies in our context, which is very important as well.
So without 10 years ago.
Sorry.
Thank you. Julia?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to this Renaissance. For me as a lawyer, Renaissance has a very bad connotation because the practice of law and legal provisions went really downhill in the so-called Renaissance.
Sounds correct.
Law became much more brutal, much more anti-women, much more anti-social classes than it was in the Middle Ages. And really, for me as a lawyer, the big gap is between sort of the 1250, so between end of the 12th century, 1250, and the French Revolution. This is the big period of development of the law, where it transitions from feudal law to absolutist and then modern law. After the French Revolution and the Revolution of 1848, it becomes modern law. So there is no renaissance in law, really. It is a downhill progression after the reclaiming of the Roman law.
Because
So much about categorization in periods.
Very see the towns from that 16th century sense, the Germanic lands of the empire, they really used, they had to, the penalty law, for example, is very, very strictly based on the legislation and becomes more and more defined and codified. But it's penal, yeah.
I mean, we have to look at administrative law, constitutional law, penal law, civil law. There's many different areas.
Sorry.
No.
I would like to give to Rob. He has already defined.
Okay, let's look at this in two phases. You have up to Mangiolino and Marozzo and their influence, they're talking very much in the Corky style. They spend a lot of time on the conduct of the duel, how you should present yourself. And don't take too much from this, but this is the high point of culture in Bologna. You have very educated individuals, as we've said. The founder is a professor at the university. So thinking progression is usual for them. They are developing a weapon which is advancing. You know, you look at a side sword, it has a forward ring to help the thrust. Then people think, we need to start to protect the hands. So you're starting to get this development. There's a technological development of the weapon. However, in that you have the way in which you conduct yourself in the duel. They're talking main sword and buckler here. They're not talking my interest in single sword. They're talking very much sword and buckler. They have various levels as to how you fight. You have the very much this is how you fight to survive, but a lot more on how you fight in a judicial way. They have Mangiolino saying things like, if you can take a blow and give back a hit, that is more honourable. And this becomes technical for them. They're really, really pushing this forward. It's very flowery language in Marozzo. If you want to have a go at translating, be my guest. But it's really, really very flowery. To the degree that when someone says, this is their left hand, you don't know if you're talking about their left hand, your opponent's left hand, their left hand from your point of view, whatever. But they're talking a lot in this way. So you have this golly thing we mentioned, Castiglione, they have some sprezzatura, which is things should be done in nonchalance. You are not necessarily looking to kill your opponent. You want to humiliate them. Because you don't kill your social class. Absolutely not. particularly if you're under the papacy, you don't kill your social class. You humiliate them, which is worse than death. That's what's important. And then something happens. Something happens in the 1550s with Vigiani and Rome, with Agrippa, as was said, who was contemporary. The language changes. You are talking about killing someone. And they start to develop a stepping thrust, which can be called a lunge. They're recognizing that as far as devastation in putting someone down, drilling someone with several feet, a lot of centimeters of steel through the body, through the major organs, is a way to put someone down on the floor. They're looking to really cause damage. When you get to the 1570s, you're coming something I've mentioned with Threader. They're talking about stepping offline and doing a technique that hits them not once, not twice, but 3 times. They're looking to parry, often, because you're looking to advise something, but you hit them, you hit them, you hit them again. If you can do it with cuts followed by a thrust, great. If you have to hit them on the same time with the same cut to really get through it, marvellous. They want to put you down. So, again, this is my interest when this prayer starts to change from some esoteric into very, very factual, cold physics, geometry, killing your opponent. And then we see the decline of the side swords of popularity, and it goes through. So, again, I do not know why, but you see some sort of shift from an upper class, broadly speaking, and those who emulate the upper classes, of dueling, of looking great, of being perfect in the duel, through to what is the efficient message, as people will go what is the efficient message, the efficient way to put people down permanently.
It's interesting, in the 16th century, the German stuff seems to go more from putting the person down to just smacking them really hard, but they can get back up again. So it's the other way around for the German stuff. Just off to me.
Yeah, no. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know that Italy's really starting to export its. I mean, the thing is about Vigiani and Dall'Agocchia is they talk about it being military art as well as a civil art. You don't necessarily see that emphasised in Marozzo and Mancinino, but with the latest sources they're emphasising this far, far more as the fundamental basic. It's like doing a target practice before you start to shoot as a company or as a regiment. They're starting to talk far more like this. And there's no comment about... They talk a lot about duels being stupid, which seems to be a general trend for a lot of things, but they're talking about how you really get yourself out. Vigiani and Dall'Agocchia talk about the simple way to survive a duel in X number of days. How do you survive? Terminology is important. How do you survive a duel? Not acquit yourself with honour. How do you survive a duel?
Surviving winning.
Absolutely.
Quick question for you. In terms of the 16th century Bolognese stuff, are they teaching my habituation to single students, or are they teaching larger classes? What do you think?
Well, that's interesting. You've certainly got people who, in the earlier places, you've got the standard thing of it being part of noblemen's education, along with dance and art and so on. As I mentioned, Bologna is at the peak of its artistic bent. Later on, with the printing press, and certainly Marozzo's have been repeatedly printed well into the 17th century. Like Patrice and other sources, that it's just a standard text that every person should read as part of their education. Vigiani's trying to simplify terminology, because Marozzo has got guards for, basically you step on the base of the left, it's got a new guard, I think. So Vigiani is trying to simplify things, and that's something we haven't talked about actually, is with these sources, they're actually trying to codify something that's been an oral art. They're trying to put something down on paper that makes sense. They're using terminology like the boar's tooth, the iron gate type. They're trying to convey something to their students. They're trying to make it understood. And they're using some of their written sources to convey it. So Vigiani is trying to simplify it. Dall'Agocchio simplifies as well. But very much in the way in which Vigiani is kind of like a technical manual, which you'd see with tuition. Dall'Agocchio is very much a help yourself manual. But as far as my impression is concerned, it is for wider distribution outside of the sample, not just for students' understanding. That's it.
Because in the transition from the 15th century to 16th century German sources and teachers, we see the more cryptic, more difficult stuff earlier on. People then try to simplify as time passes. But the more difficult stuff is the more lethal martial arts taught to nobles and tribal students. And as time goes on, we see maybe more simplified or more clarified texts teaching to larger classes and maybe a less lethal or maybe a less duly inclined.
Well, Moroso and to a lesser extent Mancellino are doing very much a holistic text. They're teaching all sorts. So you do see the Ratella shields come in, all sorts of like two swords mentioned. Interestingly, not to De Grassi using two swords again. Vigiani single sword. Full stop. That's what's interesting. Dall'Agocchio is interesting. He teaches single sword as his main, sword and dagger, and then sword and cape, weapons of opportunity or to hand. He then does something on jousting. No, I don't. But again, as far as the single combat is concerned, you have something that's perhaps a little more pragmatic, in my opinion.
I would like to address the issues about the sports mentioned before, the sports and the competition, since it's also kind of related to the latest question. So can you just tell us why Meyer is a sport fencer and Awahao is, sorry, just provoking, and how Bolognese sword is a very incredible material to study competition. So, gentlemen, please.
Yeah, Meyer, sportsman. Yeah, because he had, the numbers of the contestants and that was probably his evil twin brother. The reputation of Joachim Meyer being a sportsman is actually sort of a bit of a modern invention, isn't it?
True.
Why? Because he has no thrusts. There are no thrusts. He does a lot of flourishing around, beating about the bush, literally. But he doesn't thrust. Therefore, he was a sportsman, therefore he did teach how to kill. Okay? But then in his text, he writes specifically, we Germans are not allowed to thrust, except in wartime, and even then, not among each other.
Mm.
Yeah? You see his rapier, oh yeah, there's a big chapter on how to transform cuts to thrust and stuff like that. So thrust was something that he knew about, and thrust was lethal. And that's not something that stems from the 16th century. I can't remember the source. I heard it in Dijon, I don't know, a couple of years ago. Somebody said that there was a medieval source saying that the flat was used to punish, cut was used to hurt, and the thrust was used to kill.
That was Matt Geller's lecture.
Yeah. And this sport thing, again, Roger Norling, for example, he mentions this several times, says that Meyer mentions the war, and he never ever mentions Rechtsschule or competition of some sort. But then again, you can use his techniques, his approach, you can use it in a safer way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In my personal belief, Meyer was not a sportsman, but he was not someone that would say, you go for kill and that's it. Okay. Meyer was, in my opinion, first of all, he was a clever man. Okay, I would just connect to what you say, how to survive. He was very, very much concerned about the personal safety of the combatant rather than gaining points or making a kill. And this is something that we tend to overlook, searching for the proper technique, the proper stance, the proper guard. No, it was first about be safe, and then do stuff, and then get away safely. Okay, this is Jörg, in my opinion, in essence. But yeah, the culture, the martial culture, in tradition, yes, the competition was a very big part, but not 16th century. Competition was a very big part for a longer period of time, right?
True.
I mean, and again, we're at the social aspect of controlled violence. It's not an invention of the 16th century, and we have it today.
In his prologue, he also said that previously his ancestor fought with thrusts, and it's not the proper way now at this time.
And this is something that we can again talk about. The ancestors. We still have to look at the social context. In the 16th century, because of the Protestantism, a lot of people, you have sources in Germanic lands, in the imperial lands, say, yeah, our ancestors, but they were actually referring to the Germanic tribes that fought the Romans. You know, the Rome, imperial Rome and the papal Rome sort of merged into one. So who are those ancestors really? It's a matter of perhaps another round table.
I stopped noting that. Thank you. Rob.
Well, we've got a very clear text as far as sporting side is concerned, though I think the modern concept of sporting has to be taken with a pinch of salt. Evangelino mentions how one should fence. He ascribes points to, so higher points for the head, less so for the body, the foot, which is the place to hit. So he's looking at what's technically difficult to actually hit. You can infer it from people like Dallagocchie, who talks about jousting. So something which even at the time is recognised as anachronistic, they're doing. So there are definitely plays, they talk about Jocko, they talk about plays, not just necessarily as a kind of phrase, they are looking at it as a play going forward. Really though, you are seeing various ways of courtly plays. So Mancellino does something interesting, I find interesting. So he starts people off at close play with the false edge to the false edge. And then people have got to start from there. So people are starting at sort of an equal disadvantage and then have to come up with something clever to actually beat the opponent. So he is partly, it could be seen as putting the students into particular difficulty and having to work your way through that, and partly it's also just codifying a way in which you could hold various things. Marozzo is more interested in the etiquette of the duel and how on. He's talking more about dueling. Again, how far is dueling sporting? We need to, we need to play with that. But I mean, it's reasonably clear in their system as far as I'm concerned. Later on, they just want to kill you, really.
Thank you.
In Lichner's setting, so at least as early as the 14th century, one of the lines is that these skills were for use in earnest or in play. So for the nobles who were learning Lichner's tradition, it was for earnest fighting, but also for playing. Don't know necessarily precisely how they were playing, but there was that option that it was good for both.
Well, again, if we take something outside of one of those sources, and look at Agrippa, he actually, when people are lunging, he's telling people to turn their heads behind them, so they're doing this sort of movement. Either that's him attempting to deal with how to survive a facial wound, or it's him actually saying this is the best way to practice. So, all right, it's not strictly speaking the system, but it's someone trying to deal with this within a sal, within a play, to which we can apply context of competition, or those who are using it in earnest.
Wow, we are almost over time now. I've promised 1 hour and 15 minutes.
Still live out there.
And I would let you 5-minute questions, and it begins with you, and then.
Can we say that Italian master from the half 16 to half 17 and maybe more are growing up to the fame? And if yes, what about Germans after later?
It's interesting, yes. What you've got is you have a dominance in popularity of an Italian system. It's certainly, we know that there are Italian teachers going to Germany, into England. Later on in the 17th century, you've got even the Swedes are taking on these things. And then you've got Spain. And Spain is actually quite insular, strangely insular. You have perhaps sort of bastard son of the Distreva, you have Gerard Thibault, who's doing something akin. You have potentially Newcastle, Cavendish, is doing something during the Civil War, or after he's going into exile after the Civil War in Britain. He's doing something that may be from Spanish. But you're seeing predominance of Italian system, and you're seeing very much a linear attack with the lunge. Why is this? I don't know. We could take huge leaps and say it's very akin to some of the longsword lunges. I've seen a lot of longsword, this really fine stuff in Italian rapier that we'll not necessarily find in German, but that's huge influence. But certainly insofar as the volume of material in a simple way that is conveyable to the general mass, to the middle classes, we're starting to eat up this information. The Italian system is more simple. And I think it's because they give you everything. They don't tell you any theory until you reach the 1660s. They give you a mass. Spanish system is not so digestible. And it may just be quite as simple as that. That's why I think.
Wait, Roman?
I would just, if we take a look at the timeline, the imperial lands in opposition to the Italian cities, basically, and the states, we have a bit of a bad luck for the northern part in aspect to this popular demand. The big thing is fashion.
Exactly.
Italian fashion.
That was my point.
Okay, high fashion of Milan today, Italian cut. And in Germanic lands, it's not about that. They would just let go. They had a Kunst des Fechtens for so many hundreds of years. But there's actually one thing. It is the increased demand in warfare skill. Mind you, Bohemia, 16th century, the Hussites, constant warfare. Then you have a world, basically a civilization war, 1680 to 1648. Basically constant warfare throughout the empire. It's just perhaps the Italian style of urban dual fighting, there just wasn't much demand of that. It was much more of
Actually, I believe
military warfare sort of thing.
It's a bit like this in that the Germans, the imperials at the time, didn't feel the fashionable need for an Italian. You want an Italian fencing master, you want a French chef, you want all these type of things. That's what you want because it's fashionable. If your fencing master is not Italian, well, it must not be that good. That's exactly what happened.
Take the Elector of Saxony. And his
Gentlemen, keep it short, please, because we have other questions.
I would just add one thing that's of interest is you have one of the Christians of Denmark who gets a little treatise in 1606, so after our period, by a guy called Salvator Fabris. It's a very difficult book. Recent studies seem to be that it's an excellent anti-distreva book, not so good against Italian. So you have a king, a Protestant king, who will later go to war against the Catholics, bolstered by the Spanish. Read into it what you will. For me, I do think it is fashion, I do think it's just popularity, and I think it's accessibility. But there are so many sub-contexts with this, it's not true.
Yep.
One phrase.
Okay, we were talking yesterday about the idea of traditions. Maybe the Lichtenauer tradition had a tradition of writing texts, and maybe other traditions did not have a tradition of writing texts. That's just a suggestion.
After Mayer,
Yeah.
I think we'll do so.
Over time, we move to your question.
I'm not sure whether it's the text you're talking about, but I know Geoffrey de Chandy talks about not using the point in friendly context, and he focuses very greatly on chivalric feats of arms, which is to a certain set of blows. Could it, similar to the gang system, and we also in the gang system see a no more thrust. Do you think it may have something to do with that, especially since the feat system seems to be the gun and blow count seems to almost be a new introduction into the Germanic realm, seeing as the feats don't seem to be a specifically German thing until the 16th century.
Well, in my opinion, point and thrust is equally dangerous in any tradition. Okay, so it depends again on the intention, what you're trying to do. Basically,
Can I add something about this that I think is interesting? You're talking about this split in the Bolognese system. Later uses the point, and they use the point in a basically a pseudo lunge to defend against a cut. The only way you can do that is if the point is in your enemy. So we know, therefore, we are moving from a gentlemanly, for want of a better term, into something where you affix the point into someone's body, and that, therefore, can stop the cut. Because if you hold at any point out beyond that, it's going to get cut down.
And there's another thing, just that maybe it should have been answered within the technical aspect. But in the 16th century, you have this new tactics. Joachim Meyer again. It's the provoke, hit, and parry thing. Is it because it's safe? Provoke, hit, and parry means more than just pointing the weapon and going to the lunge, going to the thrust. Why? Is it for safety reasons, or is it something else? But it's there. We can just pinpoint it. It's there, and it's important.
It's the same with Bolognese treatises. Most of them actually, even the courtly play, is your opponent will do something and then you are doing something to them. So Dallagocchi, I know, does a lot of things on provoking, not attacking, but doing something to get them to move, and then you defeat them.
And as pointed out before or underlined before, I think trusting is dangerous from every tradition. And I can remember someone writing a paper on Greek sports, and the fact that at some games that will come back, but evidence of competition without thrusts already in the Greek period. So, yeah.
That adds the interesting question why they're so common in early Lichtenauer, or are they really all as common as you think?
Good question.
Another round table.
Well, Jörg, you had one? Gentlemen, we are already over time. Maybe we can continue this discussion on the bar, if you try to find someone willing to do so. Please, thank you again, gentlemen, for making this roundtable possible. Thank you, mon jeune public, mon plus vieux public, d'avoir réussi. Yes, you survived it. Thanks. And meet you at the bar.
Thank you.
Merci.